Okay, folks, once again, I'm talking with Vasant. Thank you very much for coming to do this talk with me. It's good to have you again.
It's absolutely my pleasure to interact with you again. I think this marks exactly 1 year that we interacted the last time.
Has it been a
And
year already?
yes, even I didn't realize it.
I was thinking maybe a few months, but that's the way life goes. Time flies
Yes,
whether you're having fun or not. Um,
yes.
Anyway, I wanted to have a discussion today about Indian law, Indian marriage. Uh, I've known Anil Murthy and other Indian activists for 10, 15 years now going on. And one of the early things I was challenged by was even understanding the vernacular of Indian law where it concerns marriage and the issues. I heard things like 498A and dowry and all these other factors that play in. And it is sort of an alien language to Westerners. We don't have laws like this. Dowry has not been an issue in the West. So it seems like a little bit like there's a learning curve for Westerners to understand what's happening in India. And I want to start with the basics. Indian law or Indian tradition going back for a very long time has been arranged marriages with dowry. Is that correct?
Yes. So I'll give an introductory note before we jump into the topic, so that I'll
Sure.
establish the note for the people. So whoever may be joining or watching this from the west side of the world, they'll at least understand what they're getting into for starters. So few months ago, or probably something like that, I was watching an interview or a discussion panel involving James Sexton, the divorce lawyer, on one of the panels, and he was also holding these misconstrued views about Indian divorce rates and marriages and everything. So I've understood that the false narratives are still popular even among the best of the people, and we can't help it. So this discussion with you, I hope, is to clear some of the misconceptions as much as possible. So
Great.
my attempt will be to show the current reality on how the relationships between men and women have been fractured over the course of time, and also to understand issues such as dowry related deaths, bride burning, sati, and all that from a historical perspective as well. So I'll also try to keep it as plainly as possible, so that an average person from the West will be able to easily understand without getting worried about the technicalities involved in the language of the law of the land.
Outstanding. Good.
Yeah. So also, please make a note. This is for the audience, that when it comes to understanding Indian law and the misuse of the laws, many men's rights activists from India, from SIF especially, have been broadly covering these topics for a long time, even before me. So huge shout out to them. What I'll be touching upon today are some of the aspects within these discussions that require more focus, is what I believe. And to end on that, also huge congratulations to Mr. Anil Murthy for being announced as the one who will be taking forward the ICMI brand. Thanks to you and all that. Okay, so let's jump into what exactly is the dowry. So basically, dowry in ancient Indian context had been a voluntary and an affectionate gift giving practice that had a symbolic value as a way of blessing and supporting the newlywed couples rather than as an obligation.
Okay.
Feminist studies, however, say that these voluntary acts had taken shape of compulsory demand from the groom's side. What they never took into consideration is some aspects such as the greed of the bride's parents, who view the groom as the economic pumping units, and hence, they set the groom price based on the groom's market value as a way of status signaling. That's the introduction. Yeah,
Okay. All right. Well,
yeah.
that's good, and that's a good place to start. So, this
Mhm.
was how far back does this tradition go? I mean, we're talking about India, one of the most ancient cultures on earth. How far back does this tradition go?
I believe it would be happening for a very long time, for hundreds of years. Although people need to understand that these were not the terms that were used back then, because dowry is something of European origin, and we also address the dowry with another word from Arabic origin called as dahej. Okay, those are not the accurate representations of what happens in India when it comes to the bride wealth. It used to be called as tri dhan, that means women's property or wealth from the
Mhm.
historical perspective. That's how it used to be addressed as. It could be something like the gifts that the bride receives before the marriage, during the marriage, and after the marriage. So that is how it's been a part of for a very long time. As far as you can trace back, it has always been existent.
Okay. Now, the
Yeah.
following up on British colonialism and the laws that
Yes.
were established in India, it was, I think, I read that it was in 1961 that dowry was outlawed in India. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes. Partially true, because I will add a lot of historical context to it. So please bear with me, because
Sure,
it's going
take
to
your
be,
time.
yeah, it's going to be a very lengthy topic, and I tried my best to condense it as much as possible so that we can have a very easy discussion on this topic without making it complicated. So basically, what happened after independence in 1947 for India, there was a need to highlight that India did. There is something that we need to highlight, that India did not have centralized crime reporting system at the time. So whenever a wife died, the reporting of these incidents never distinguished between murder, suicide, or accidents. That is the main point.
Wow, okay.
Okay. So that means every death was assumed by default as dowry death at the time.
Wow.
And guess how these reports were collected?
Uh,
It's very easy to guess. So the term that I had found was anecdotal evidence.
right.
That means feminists and women's organizations also used the false tactics, such as, many of these reports, incidents were underreported due to social stigma and patriarchal norms and all that. So basically, they used anecdotal evidence as a tool to build the narratives. So I'm going to list out probably 4 points on a little bit of how this anecdotal evidence was used to build the narrative. 4 points. First thing is, feminists belonging to All India Women's Conference organizations started collecting first-hand reports. They knock on the door of a house and they ask the woman if she was harassed. If the woman says yes, they'll register it as dowry harassment case. And also, media at the time used to report every death of a woman as a dowry death in the name of creating awareness, and only ended up creating mass hysteria and outrage among the public. Third point, the Law Commission of India and the parliamentary committees started to accept these half investigated reports as absolute truths. So there's never been formal data, and hence relied on submissions only from these activists, NGOs, and citizens. Basically, testimonies from women, and particularly belonging to the rural areas. That's how it began initially.
This sounds like Western feminist information gathering. It sounds like it was done the same thing. So they basically just fabricated the numbers about bride burnings and dowry death. Oh my
Yes.
goodness. So yeah, and I did a little bit of research through AI, and there's that mythology is still carrying through. If you research this, you'll get all kinds of information telling you 19,000 bride burnings every year in India. And as soon as I read that, I knew it wasn't true. And comparatively, 19,000 in a country of 1.2 billion, whatever it is in India, is a small number of people comparatively. But what you're saying is that those numbers aren't correct either.
Yes. So this is how they have brought forward the feminist toolkit in the 1950s. So I've listed down what the toolkit consists of. It's going to be slightly lengthy. Again, please bear with me.
That's fine.
So the first one is, like we discussed, I'm going to use this phrase a lot because I want the people to register in their minds how this anecdotal evidence was repeatedly relied upon for so many decades. So the first thing is from the feminist toolkit of the 1950s is to create a narrative based on anecdotal evidence and emotional appeal and call it as lived reality for many families. Second thing, use Article 15, subsection 3 as a justification. Basically, Article 15 states that of the Indian Constitution that the state shall not discriminate against any citizen on grounds only of religion, race, caste, sex, place of birth, or any of them. But coming to Article 15, subsection 3, it states that the state can also make special provisions for women and children. So that's a direct contradiction of what Article
So in
15
other
says.
words, what they said before does not apply at all when it
Yes,
concerns sex.
yes. So that's what the second point in the toolkit. The third one is use already existing false narratives of sati. That means sati was an ancient Hindu practice where a wife voluntarily self-immolates after the death of the husband on the husband's funeral pyre as a symbol of devotion. This is basically a hoax and a bullshit. We have to be very honest about it. Please forgive the language that is being used. That's because that's how stupid these ideas have been. There were there was really historical evidence of such instances. They were there, but it was never widely practiced as the West believes. So it is basically a manufactured lie of the British Empire, who also used a social reformer called as Raja Rammohan Roy, and apparently he abolished sati, which was never existing in the first place. So
Okay.
that's how they established very strongly of evil practices in India, which never existed. And comes the fourth point. They used the freshly formed status of the independent India as an excuse to accept the imperfect and the only accessible anecdotal evidence. This means India had no administrative capacity at all at the time. Fifth one, like I mentioned before, they heavily relied on social reformers to create more outrage on these issues within the media. The sixth one, because men who have been highly gynocentric in nature, they gave in to their obligation and finally introduced the 1961 Act and called that non existent cruel tradition a social evil. Please keep in mind, everyone, the audience, that there had never been robust data. So that's the toolkit over there.
Okay,
That
so
is the history of
the
1961.
impression I'm getting here is that India got their independence in 47, and it
Yes,
didn't take very long after that before feminists came in and started fabricating a narrative about Indian marriage and relationships
yes,
and death and what was happening. And by 1961, dowries abolished. And then 20 years later, in the 80s, you comes 498A. Uh,
correct.
so tell us about 498A. This is where it really starts getting pretty hairy,
I,
as a
I
matter of
know.
fact.
Before we reach to what how the 1983 498A was introduced, we have to understand what happened in between as well.
Okay,
Because
good.
when the 1961 Act was introduced, it only addressed the dowry related transactions within the law, but not the dowry related violence. That's the main distinction there.
Okay,
So, in order to again, demonize men within the marriages, they had to again invent a new narrative. Now comes the brilliant ones. Everyone, please hold on. It's called as dowry deaths and the bride burning. That's the narrative that was introduced at the time. So, whenever a woman died in the kitchen due to her own carelessness or inefficiency in handling the diesel stoves at the time, which were very much prevalent, it was termed as died under mysterious circumstances of burning. That was how the narrative was first built. So, to summarize, they used to bring up uh, very mysterious reportings of such incidents and used to widely publicize them and used to cause outrage as well within the media. That is the one. Second thing is that the women's movement organizations like Stree Sangharsh and Mahila Dakshata Samiti collected statements from victims' families documenting the patterns of dowry-related cruelty within the marriages. Third point, they managed to report somehow around 139 incidents by 1979 with the help of police and the judicial recordings. Fourth point, the Parliamentary Joint Committee, which was formed around 1978 to 1980, was formed uh, by discussing police reports, hospital records of burn injuries related cases, and also the court cases which were recorded under the faulty 1961 Act. That is how they have gathered the information. So please again mind you the audience that there had been never a crime branch such as National Crime Records Bureau, such as we have, which is what we have today. At the time we didn't have any of that, but still they managed to bring these reports together based on no evidence except anecdotal evidence. And the sixth point which I want to highlight is, this is an important one, where a woman by name Sashibala, who was the daughter of Satyarani Chadda, she was believed to have been burnt in 1979 due to dowry demands. The historical records say that the police neglected to collect basic evidence and hence did not charge her husband with murder. The women activists were very angry about it. They were angry that the evidence was not collected, but the same people had no problem to rely on just this anecdotal evidence with no proper investigation that introduced the 1961 Act.
Right.
Yeah.
We're seeing a repeating theme here. Now, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but you now have national crime statistics. Are they more reliable?
No, I would say no.
Yeah, same here. We have statistics on domestic violence and they're all BS. But so I'm wondering, you're not in any better shape now
Yes.
than you were then. So the feminist influence is still there,
Yes.
still happening. Now, there has been one of the biggest topics when I talk to my Indian friends is the abuses of 498A.
Correct.
Husband and wife have an argument,
Yes.
and the wife makes an accusation, and the next thing you know, the whole husband's family is in jail.
Yes.
Can you tell us how this, I mean, it's hard for a Westerner to understand how this happens.
Yes.
Even though we have men in prison for false accusations all the time,
Mhm.
it's nothing like it is in India. It is, there are people killing themselves regularly over this kind of abuse. So tell us about typical 498A abuse. What actually happens in that?
So before we address the topic directly, I want to also include a bit of history on what attitudes led to the introduction of an absurd law such as 498A with the most bizarre definitions of cruelty within the law. Okay, so the first thing is we have to understand in the 1970s, when all this propaganda was being built as a narrative to demonize men in marriages and all that, it was also the time of second wave feminism, if people can recall.
Right.
So the women's organizations jumped in on these incidents and they created feminist advocacy and legislative push. So that's the first important thing. Another thing is we need to understand with all this drama that was highly successful and which led to the passing of the 498A law, we need to understand that within that definition of cruelty, any form of woman's death that occurs within the first 7 years of marriage is automatically considered as dowry death.
Still today?
Yes.
Wow. Could you say that one more time?
Yeah. Any form of woman's death that occurs within first 7 years of marriage is directly considered as dowry death, or
Even
at least
even without
management is.
evidence that of there being a dowry.
No, it doesn't matter. Once the complaint is filed, they'll proceed with the assumption of guilt.
Wow.
Yeah.
And now in India, my understanding is, and at any time, if I display any ignorance, Vasanth, please correct me
Yeah.
as I go along. But my understanding is that when the husband's family is accused of dowry abuse, the whole family can go to jail.
Yes, that's correct.
I read, or I
Husband,
talked, go ahead.
husband's mom and dad, husband's relatives, husband's distant relatives as well. There were also cases where the husband's grandparents were also implicated in the 498 case.
And this is done frequency. Now, my understanding, and again, correct me if I'm right or I'm wrong, there is no presumption of bail.
Yes,
That's just
yes.
up to the judge's discretion, but bail is not guaranteed.
Yes, yes, that was the case until for so long, where the arrests were mandatory up until 2014. Thanks to again the men's rights activists of India, uh, they were able to introduce something called as Arnesh Kumar guidelines, which will prevent mandatory arrests of the husband or the immediate family members. So basically, what happens is, like you have said earlier, it used to be like whenever a woman goes to the police station, files a complaint, immediately the husband and all the family members used to get implicated and get arrested. Now, because of these guidelines, at least the attempt was to stop these arrests, mandatory arrests. But I'm afraid we have to admit that is not being followed even now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So their case is part of the problem here is the Indian judiciary not even following the law.
Yes, correct. And
Okay,
also, most importantly, whenever usually what happens whenever someone lies in the court, there must be perjury cases, correct?
right.
So Indian courts and the lawyers don't pursue that. Whenever a woman files a false case, we have a section. I believe it's called as IPC 211. I guess I could be wrong, but I think I am also right. So basically, IPC 211 deals with the punishing uh, of the people for the offense of making a false accusation to injure or harm someone. This is the law that is not actively being used at all. Ideally, they must, but they are not using it all.
And I want to bring this point in while we're talking about this. You're saying just like in the United States, false
Mm.
accusations are not punished. They pretty much ignore them, even though they are illegal technically. There's very little that's ever done about them. Um, what percentage of dowry abuse accusations in India would you say are false?
Almost 95% to 97%. That's
So there
because
is
of
still
the
a small fraction of actual
very
dowry
small
abuse
fraction. Yes.
that happens, but most of the
Yes.
accusations are what is the purpose? What's the motivation for making a false accusation most of the time?
Revenge. A woman feels a bit of discomfort and she wants to take revenge. That is the most commonly found pattern among these cases. And if so the, in the cruel in the 498a in the 498a there is a line that says that talks about the cruelty, okay, mental harassment or the cruelty or something like that. So these definitions are not clearly addressed at all. When these definitions are not clearly mentioned within the law, anything that a woman feels uncomfortable about can be considered as mental harassment. So that again is a tool that women have been actively using for so long. And even
Yes.
the Supreme Court of India had dubbed 498A is the most misused law in India. And they also called it as legal terrorism under 498A.
What sort of defense can, and I understand sometimes men don't even have the funds to defend themselves legally. They're sort of at the mercy of the system. But
Yeah.
what can men do once a false accusation has been made? What sort of recourse is available to them to stop the harassment?
They basically do, and see there have been discussions about 498 cases where there are certain set of rules that people can follow and try to get out of the situation. But honestly, once you're stuck with 498, your life is almost over, to be very honest. That's the seriousness of the situation.
And
So
we do need to remind the viewers here that what we're talking about is a law that only protects women. Men have
yes,
no protection whatsoever under 498A at all.
yes. So what we have to understand is that on top of all these things, the feminists are also now advocating actively for something called as marital rape law. You must have heard about it, correct?
Yes.
So what people need to understand is whatever these cruelty related issues that are being addressed within the proposition for marital rape law states that women are not protected within the marriage under instances of rape, but they are simply lying. That's because whatever violence against women that needs to be addressed has already been acknowledged within 498A Domestic Violence Law Act of 2005. And earlier we used to have something called as Section 377, which acknowledges something called as um, unnatural sexual intercourse or something like that. But now that's been stricken down, and only men are considered perpetrators in that situation. Women can never be perpetrators of rape in Indian context. And also, there is no law for men for whenever a domestic violence takes place within the household.
So, and is there any efforts legally to address the conflict between your constitutional guarantees of equal treatment under the law and then these laws that totally contradict that? And are there court cases pending about this? Is there anybody trying to address this legally?
There have been attempts to file something what we call as PILs. Uh, so basically, these are, I think, if I'm right, I think several attempts have been made where people file PILs to request the Supreme Court to make the laws gender neutral, or to address domestic violence against men within the marriage, or to introduce or to address the growing instances of suicide among men. But the Supreme Court and all the other courts have stricken down those requests from the public, saying that, do you want us to make a law for someone who might commit suicide in the future? That was the attitude given to the requests. Yeah.
How about
So
yes? I like
yeah,
yes for an answer on that. You do want to make that
yeah,
law. And
yeah.
and that's happening a lot. How bad is the problem overall? I mean, we've seen cases. I watch them on Twitter. The Indian MRAs. Sometimes one case after another of somebody killing themselves for this dowry harassment, these false allegations that are going on, destroying their lives, destroying the lives of the people in their family, and they end up
Yeah.
killing themselves. How often is
Yes.
that happening?
I believe if the statistics are right, a man commits suicide for every 9 minutes or something
Wow.
close to that. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Wow, wow,
Bas-
wow.
yeah. So it's very it's a growing concern, uh, and we need to address it as swiftly and as quickly as possible. Yeah.
So the overall suicide rate is a man every 9 minutes, and some undetermined percentage of those have to do with 498A.
Yes,
And,
yes.
and
Most of them are due to reasons arising from domestic situations. It could be, pressure from the family to, pay alimony or the maintenance, or it could be, blackmail from the wives, something like that. Or it could be mostly because when wives get into an affair with another person and all that, that also causes severe distress to men. And
sure.
Indians are not ready to address that. So whenever a man expresses pain, saying that, my goodness, my wife is in an affair with someone, he's quickly shamed first. So that's the attitude most men give towards the fellow men. It might be a bit blunt, but that's the truth.
Well, I mean, and yeah, I'm not surprised by that at all.
Yeah.
Both of our cultures produce simps by the millions. It's just what we do, and we shame men for problems that women bring into their lives. And I've read recently there was some higher up in the Indian judiciary that said that just because a woman has an affair, doesn't mean the husband has any rights to stop it or something like that. What on earth was that about?
So this is there. We had a Chief Justice by name Justice Chandrachud. Okay, so this person was completely feminist right from the get-go, and he's been trying to be, in the good books of the feminists all throughout his career. So that was when he has he's given a statement saying that the man is not the owner of women's sexuality. Sorry, man is not the owner of wife's sexuality. So that means a woman can go. Oh my goodness, I've been reminded of another beautiful point within the Indian Evidence Act of India. So basically, what happens if a man and woman are married and the woman goes out of the marriage or sneaks out of the marriage, gets into an affair, has a kid with the boyfriend, and comes back, the court considers the kid that she has with the boyfriend as the husband's child. So the husband is considered the legal father of the child. So that is how it is being assumed.
That, believe it or not, it's the same here in most
Yeah,
states in the United States. That if she cheats and
yeah,
while you're
yeah.
legally married, if she has an
Mhm.
affair and has a child, too bad, it's yours.
Yes,
And the guy who actually fathered the child is off the hook.
yes.
Pretty crazy way to approach things, but for some reason we seem to be doing that. Uh, Vasant, what has this done, do you think, over the last 40, 50 years? What has this done to the trust, the relationships between men and women in your
Yes.
country? What's happened?
So I've broken down this um, to address this topic into few sections. Okay, so that is basically how the relationships have been fractured at various interaction levels. The first thing is at the what is the place where uh, both males and females get to meet for the first time in a large number? That is the school.
Right.
In the school, girls are undoubtedly, favored more, and it has been repeatedly reported that boys have been falling behind in the grades or in the continuation of the academic achievements. That is level one. Level two is the dating area. So we have a section called as BNS 69. Okay. So basically, a man and woman get into a relationship, and if a man thinks that the relationship is not working out and he wants to back out from the relationship, there is a legal provision available for women to file a rape case on the man under the false promise of marriage. That means the woman is going to tell the police that the consent for sex was obtained under the promise of marriage, or it could be, some commitment for an employment or something like that. And her statement is final. There won't be any verification out of that. And the guy could be jailed for 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow,
So that's
that's insane.
that's the level, the interaction. That's where the fracture of the relationships is happening at dating level. And there's also dating scams as well. That means you meet a woman on a dating app or something like that. She'll invite you specifically to that one pub which she has a deal with. So the man and woman go there, and they'll order few drinks or food or something like that. Let's say the bill is supposed to be, $50 or something like that. The final bill will be around $500, or it could be more, $1,000 or something like that. So that means they are trying to implicate men, who are actually looking for relationships, and now they are, stuck with the cases of cheating or something like that. Now, if he doesn't pay, he'll be threatened with rape cases under BNS 69.
Oh, wow. How
Yeah,
much is this
so
happening?
a lot, a lot, a lot. You just type honey trapping cases in India, you'll find a bunch of them.
Honey trapping cases in India. I'll be doing that today.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, yeah, I want to go back for a moment to this provision that if a couple has sex and it was allegedly under the pretense of going to get married, and the
yeah.
man breaks it off, then it becomes rape and a sort of retroactive rape that happens in her past. I take it the other way around. If she decides not to get married, there's no,
There's
there's
no
no,
provision for the man, to seek any legal recourse on that. The man has to accept his fate.
okay. So
So it's one-sided law again.
she has all the rights, he has no rights.
He doesn't. Yeah.
Same thing. You know, it's
Yes.
really interesting to me, as a side note, is that, most Westerners are told their entire lives that India is a very patriarchal country that is horribly cruel to their women, that the men are vicious savages, and they set their wives on fire because she burned the toast.
Yes.
And what we find in reality is that things are so crazily just the opposite of what we're told. I wonder if that's the feminist influence on media in the West.
Definitely. That's because I think uh, Peter Wright has pointed out how Western gynocentrism has been, brought into India during the British colonial empire, and that's the beginning of the end. Yeah, that's where it had all started.
Dowry was criminalized in 61. Uh,
Yeah.
do people still practice dowry in India?
Yes,
Okay,
they do.
so
They do.
the law has not stopped people from practicing their traditions.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Would you say that has it curtailed dowry any, or is it still just
So,
what mainly people do?
so I'll have to point out a very interesting case that happened in 2003. Okay, this was the case of a woman named Nisha Sharma. Okay, um, what happened was in the news, it was reported that this lady had filed a complaint related to dowry demand against her the fiance, the about to be husband, okay, and his family. But then 9 years later, it was found that she had fabricated those lies about the dowry demand, all because she wanted to elope with her boyfriend at the time. Basically, the boyfriend crashed the wedding, and she has decided to use the dowry related law as a tool to frame the husband and the family. So, what I'm trying to get at is women are totally aware of the laws and how they function, and they know how to use it and when, and win all the laurels in the eyes of the feminists, the media, and the foreign NGOs and all that, who basically portray themselves as the ultimate victims of patriarchy. So that's how they've been, um, manipulating the public
Yep.
for a very long time. Yeah.
Now, here in the West, men are starting to avoid marriage. They're even as starting to avoid women. There's a recent study released, something like 63, 64% of
Yeah.
young men have never even approached a woman for a date. Uh, is is there anything similar happening in India? Are the marriage rates declining?
Actually, no. In my observation, the marriage rates are not declining. Although people are waking up, I would say, to the harsh realities of the marriage. People are. It's slow. It's very slow, but I do see, but I do see that people are trying to understand. Oh my goodness, this is not something that we can uh, bear with going forward. But still, I think men still worship the vagina a lot, so they can't hold themselves back from getting into this marriage related transactions.
And so they're still pursuing it, but you are saying there is a raising awareness at this point
Yes,
that that people are
Yes.
starting to wake up that,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
if you get married, you can end up in prison.
Yes. Yes.
Uh, what a horrible situation.
It is such a sad state.
So what are there current efforts for, I know that Neil Murty and others are always doing something. These guys
Mhm.
stay busy all the time. Uh, what sort of organizational things should men in India know about? I mean, there's always SIF. Is there any other organizations that work on these issues?
So, along with the along with SIF, and there are other men's organizations that have been working independently. Some collaborate with SIF, some absolutely hate SIF, and there's a bit of infighting also going on because of several factors and all that. Some of which you already know.
Oh, yeah,
So,
some of which I've personally
yes,
experienced.
yes, yes, yes. So, this that. So,
I'm wondering, we've had a problem here in the West. I mean, it is, be careful about how I say this. Women have not been a particularly good addition to the men's activism. I mean, we
correct.
have a couple of sterling examples of women that have done really good work. I'm not taking that
Yes,
away from them. But for the
yes,
most part, women in the West, when they come into this red pill MRA space, they're cooperative and supportive until they gain a little bit of following, and then they want to start telling everybody what to do.
yes,
And it crashes and burns, and they end up, going in. Do you have
yes.
any of that? I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but
No, I'm absolutely. I've been waiting to talk about this for a long time because I've been See, most people might not know, but if people get a chance to visit my page, I've been actively calling out this one particular female men's rights activist, Deepika Bharadwaj, a lot. Not because of the work that she's been doing, but because of her regular, you know, manner in which she shames men in particular. Recently, a person has committed suicide and she has decided to call men fragile for committing suicide. So I thought that was really not something a men's rights activist would say
you
by
would,
any means.
yes.
Yeah,
My
because
God.
no one is talking about the triggers that contributed to his suicide, nor the environmental factors, nor the people that had pushed him to suicide. But instead, this particular woman decided to shame men with the exact wording, something similar to this. Why are why are modern men becoming so fragile? Just because their wives are getting into affairs, or they're facing some 498A cases or something like that, they are ending their lives as if there is no tomorrow at all. So the tone in which she had presented that view did not sit with me very well, actually. So I decided to call her out whenever I can. I don't have any personal grudge towards her because I hardly care about what she does with her life and all that. But when it comes to men's rights issues, and for a person who claims to be in this space for about 12, 13 years, if this is the attitude she's still carrying after a decade of men's rights activism, I doubt if she's really a men's rights activist. And it's been pointed out several times by many people within the MRA space that she's been extorting money from so many people. Now, people could challenge me saying, where is the proof that she is doing that? Now, let's say that I don't have. Why is that accusation coming in the first place? What would drive people to make an accusation if it is not something that's been repeatedly occurring within her own circle? And there has been a very strict observation that many people within the MRA spaces itself, they don't actually think that feminism itself is bad. They keep addressing feminism as toxic version of feminism, as if they still believe that there exists a good version of feminism in the roots of it. So I can see that people are only hopping on the bandwagon of the MRA spaces and all that. They want to be highlighted, they want to be in the good books of the media and all that, as if they are doing a favor for men's issues. But if you look into it very strictly, you will find that these people are not interested in men's rights activism at all, but they exist only to gain some limelight and try their ways to extort money from these people who
Yeah,
are
I've
who
seen
have been
this
the victims.
same phenomena here of
Yeah.
people talking about, well, there's good feminism and then there's extreme feminism. Or another argument they say is that feminism was good 50 years ago and then it took a wrong turn. No, it wasn't. Feminism was a hate movement from the moment of its inception. That's all it ever was. It's a movement
Yes.
for power, for money, for control, and it's based on a hateful agenda and always has been.
Yes.
Yes, I've seen that other people trying to, they imagine somehow they're going to be more appealing to the media if they say things like this. Uh, it nonsense.
There had been recorded evidences from probably around 1914 or 15, something like that. And this was a book called as Towards a Sane Feminism. I've learned about this from one of the blogs of Janice Faymango's writings, that it was pointed out that much of the pre-war feminist activism was more it existed solely about capturing power from the politicians existed at the time, and it had nothing to do with advocating for women's rights, because who's going to talk about the anti-suffrage movement then? Why did that had not been considered into the discussions for so long? That's the exact reason why I even wrote a blog, stating that women's studies in India must be completely wiped out, where I had, used historical examples from India, how feminists use faulty information within the academic studies and how they brainwash students. I've prepared an entire checklist of that. People can verify whenever they get a chance, but that's the reality. We should never give feminism, a benefit of doubt that it had good intentions to begin with, because that had never been the case.
If you will send me the link to your page, I'll make sure
Yes,
this is underneath so
yes.
people can go. I'd like them to have a chance to go check out your work anyway. Is there
Exactly.
anything about marital law or 498A or any of this that I have not asked you? Because I'm probably still ignorant enough. There would be a dozen questions I should ask, but don't even know to ask.
There's a lot of things within um, the history of 498A and all that, which I think I can cover. I'll try that, because most people need to understand. Just please allow me a moment. Yeah. So uh, we were discussing how bride burning and dowry deaths were actively happening before the 1983 law was introduced. What people need to understand is that all these burn injury related or bride burning related deaths have vanished right after the introduction of gas cylinders in India, or when they had actually become affordable or widely available. So, if the bride burning was a reality, and if feminists want us to actually acknowledge the incidents that had happened, they need to first give us the actual report, including the forensic reports, for us to believe that these incidents actually happened. You cannot dictate us using the anecdotal evidence as the ultimate truth and then make arguments against us. So that's the thing. If what we are claiming is false, please publish the data on the bride burning and its link to the dowry death. That's the only request I have about this.
Unfortunately, anecdotal evidence is the only evidence that feminists have ever needed to make claims.
Yes,
And
yes.
sometimes they don't even have the anecdotes, they just have an imagination.
Very poor imagination, I must say. And I forgot to mention that there's another most important aspect of the dowry related issues. It's that the issue surrounding dowry had more to do with inheritance laws actually. more than it had to do with the dowry
Right.
related transactions. So it's the something like, um, in probably around 70s 80s or something like that, we had something called as farmers protests that happened. Okay, what feminists cleverly did was they had relied on a very popular personality called as Sharad Joshi, who was the front person for the farmers protest and all that. And they used his clout and used his clout to advertise and advocate for feminist related laws, or feminist advocacy and all that. So basically what they did was, when they asked Sharad Joshi to talk about or highlight women's issues, he said this. Okay, women are an incarnation of Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth. Because of patriarchal enslaving of women, the oppression of women in the households, the denial of land ownership and decision making power, farmers have been facing the curse of the poverty. By introducing schemes, I think these schemes were called as Lakshmi Mukti or something like that, liberated village, or where it's basically it centered around liberating women, which would grant them um, the power to transfer all the land to women in the household without having to wait until a male member of the family is dead. It's basically about that. That is the first thing. It is about the transfer of the property directly to the lady of the house. Second thing is also to introduce all women panels within these villages where these farmers protests and all were happening. So these inheritance laws, originating from 1956 originally, did not allow women to have direct access to property ownership, like we've been discussing. And hence, by introduction of these schemes in the villages, although they were short lived and restricted to only few areas, they addressed the gap by giving women the direct ownership of the property without having to wait for the male member's death, which I've already pointed out. So, yeah.
We could have an hour-long discussion on that
I
alone.
can, yeah, I still have a lot more to discuss on this, but in the interest of time, we'll keep it simple so that people don't get an overdose of the information.
Is there anything else that you can think of that we could cover in just a short amount of time we have left?
Um, yes. So I think now that we've seen how these laws have been brought forward into the Indian scenarios and all that, we need to also understand how the the nonsense of DEI also entered into our corporates in India. I have also included in my blog, which I had mentioned earlier, a clear, uh, explanation of the PowerPoint presentations that were given within corporate offices, asking people to, they used to they use sugar coated language to address these issues and tell people, about the gender inclusivity, how it is important to address that there are more than two genders, you have to be nice to transgender people and all that. So that's one thing that's happening. Another thing is the misandry, the non-stop misandry that is uh, evolving in Indian media and also in the movies. They've started to make movies such as, there's an upcoming film called as Bad Girl, where, they make jokes about killing all men very casually. And the rest of it. I don't have to explain on that more, but I hope you get the idea. And I also recall your discussion with Mr. Anil Murthy, where you people discussed how Atul Subhash's suicide has been, diverted into something that is totally non-related and called his suicide, copycat suicide, where they started to blame him for his own death, never the women and all that. So, yeah, those can constitute the end of our discussion.
It's rough business.
Yeah.
Folks, I've been enjoying this conversation with Vasant. I would like to do this again in a few months if you're open to it. I think there's a lot to cover.
Available.
And I think there's a lot of benefit to be had between our two cultures connecting on these issues because there are more similarities than there are differences. The language is a little different, and so we have to get, and some of the laws are different, but basically, we're dealing with the same problem. The British left it in your country, and they ended up leaving it in ours too. Hopefully, we'll get past this one of these days. Ladies
Yeah.
and gentlemen, Vasant, thank you very much, and we'll see you guys next time.